There's a lot of times what people want is they want a 10, 15-minute easy process to get in to visit their loved one. And so, when you're in the nicer areas, then obviously your clients that can afford services are much more likely to be close by. Or we even have a tour for a person who's literally able to walk to a care home, and she won't consider any of our other care homes because she's inside the neighborhood of one of our care homes. So very much a location focused type of business. They're all 8-bed facilities. You'll never really have to be around more than 7 other people. And from a ratio perspective, we have a 1-to-4 ratio during the day and a 1-to-8 ratio at night, which allows us to sort of handle residents with higher needs, higher acuity, slightly more complex medical stuff we can handle because we have enough staff to oversee that.
Welcome to Aging in Style, the podcast dedicated to celebrating aging and what it takes to do it well. I'm Loe Williams. I'm a certified senior advisor and senior housing expert. In each episode, you'll learn stories of older adults who are thriving in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and in some cases in their hundreds. Whether you're an older adult or the child of an older adult, this podcast is filled with insightful resources, organizations that are doing incredible work, and stories that will inspire you to volunteer, learn, and who knows, maybe even skydive in your golden years. Hi, welcome back to today's episode of Aging in Style with Loe Williams. Today we are talking about a trend that we have seen, which is people wanting a smaller assisted living experience versus one of the larger communities. And we've talked before about residential care homes and what they are, but we're going to expand on that a bit today with our guest. So today our guest is Loe Hornbuckle. He's the CEO and founder of Sage Oak Assisted Living and Memory Care. It was founded in 2015, and Sage Oak isn't just another assisted living company. It is the boutique assisted living company. With 5 locations in Dallas, Sage Oak provides small, intimate home settings that allow those who need a little extra care to receive the love and dignity that they deserve. And Sage Oak has also built 2 ground up, or in the process of building 2 ground up boutique assisted living memory care developments, one in Texas and one in Louisiana. So welcome, Loe. I'm glad you're on the show today.
Yeah, really excited to be here. And it's so great for us to finally connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to ask my guests, what drew you into senior living?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think something that's really important for folks in this business, because I think someone's why is probably the most important reason to sustain them. And what I see as a difficult business, right? Obviously, it's a calling, but taking care of people over 24 hours a day can be a difficult task. So for me, I got into the business mostly because, I thought it was a good business. But what was crazy was about a year prior to getting into the business, my dad passed away. He was on hospice and he had a really bad experience. And I spent the better part of a year trying to figure out if I wanted to sue the hospice company. And around the time that kind of statute of limitations for that process kind of ended, I sort of stumbled into this business opportunity. And, I think I was analyzing it. I think it was one of those situations where, consciously I was thinking about it from like, okay, this is a business. And then when I got into the business, all those emotions and all those feelings started to kind of pop up for me. So I really got into the business because of my dad, even if at the time I didn't know it. I was just being pulled in this direction because in 2013 I was managing a car dealership. So it was definitely not a traditional route into dementia care, right? Selling warranties on Hondas to taking care of people with dementia in the span of 18 months is a pretty interesting timeline. So that's really what happened to me was that my dad kind of inspired me to not want to have families kind of go through what we did.
I think that's great. And I think you hit it right on the nail on the head that people, for the most part, who work in this industry, it is a calling and it is a passion because it's not always easy. And there's a lot of emotional attachments we form with seniors, and we want to do our best for the seniors. So I agree that it really is a calling. Can you tell us what the differences are between these smaller type assisted livings or care homes, and then, what the difference between those are between that and the larger traditional type assisted livings?
Sure. So what I would say is that there really are a few different product classes, and I'm involved in 2 of the product classes. So on one end of the spectrum, you have the very large, 100-bed, 200-bed facilities. These are, all typically in one building, and it's what people think about when they think about, assisted living or memory care. Sometimes they think about a nursing home, but the key is that it's a pretty large facility. It's all under one building, generally, one licensure, things like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, you kind of have this sort of mom and pop, maybe someone owns one care home or two care homes. And honestly, I think there's probably decent problems with both models. Having been an operator of several RAL communities, I can kind of talk about that a little bit. There's very little debate inside of, our community about which one produces better outcomes. For the most part, most people are pretty firmly in the corner that you're going to have better outcomes in terms of, quality of food, in terms of quality of attention, individualization, less confusion for someone that has cognitive impairment, right? Because there's no long hallways. It's a home. It feels more familiar. The kitchen's open. So, the bacon's sizzling in the morning, the coffee's percolating. It's an anchoring device. But the problem with residential assisted living or care homes is they don't really have a lot of scaling. You never quite have enough people. It's very rare you'll go to a care home that'll have an activities coordinator. It's very rare you'll go to a care home that has transportation. And so care homes are often, people wearing many hats, doing the job. And that's good, except that when you have one person wearing a lot of hats, you do kind of have single point of failure sometimes, right? You've probably seen care homes before that run really well, and then the owner gets sick or the owner gets burnt out, and then kind of quality goes down, or even they have a loss of quality for 2 weeks while they're on vacation. On the other end of the spectrum, the big box has, some incredible advantages, in terms of, access to financing. They have incredible advantages in terms of scaling. They can purchase things at a reduced price. They, have transportation. They have these silos where they have housekeeping and meal service and all these things. But the outcomes aren't that great, and not everybody really should be in those places. And the physical plan is challenging, right? It can be really long hallways, things like that. So I think care homes will always produce better outcomes. And I think that big box will always have scaling advantages. And for certain types of people that are very extroverted, that want to, maybe they're not super dependent, they're fairly independent, they want to, go out on field trips with their friends, those can be really, really awesome places. But for high acuity residents, there's a real challenge. So I think there's challenges with both models. And so while I think, I would probably never build a big box facility, we did want to tap into the scaling advantages that come with a big building. And of course, the permutation, the combination for us is we build campuses of care homes. And the reason we have, 5 or 6 homes in the Dallas area is because you need that many homes, in my opinion, to have the scaling necessary so that it's not just the owner basically, pouring themselves into the business day in and day out, because to me, that's not sustainable. And so for us, the best model is basically a bunch of care homes on a campus. So you get all the scaling of a big building, but you get the better outcomes and the individualization that comes with a care home model.
Mm-hmm. And I think for people who maybe have not listened to our podcast about care homes, let's kind of define a little more what a care home is. So, I mean, it's a house in a neighborhood that has been completed so that they've gone back and retrofitted it basically so that you have wider doorways. Everything is set up for seniors. You have the bathroom is set for seniors, the shower. You want to tell us a little more about your care homes and how you have changed them from just a regular home into a care home?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have 5 homes now that we operate, one that we've leased to another operator. There's a mix of care homes that we've designed and a mix of care homes that we've purchased. Obviously, you're sort of limited on some of the renovations you can do when they're currently occupied and you need to have a functioning kitchen during that transition period. Our care homes are all pretty different. The ones we design, we definitely place an emphasis on private bathrooms. That's something that a lot of care homes, typically what you'll see. So I guess to define it, I would say typically you're going to see 8 to 12 beds, maybe 6 to 12 beds would kind of be a traditional care home. In Texas, as long as you stay under 16 and under, then you're in the same licensure bracket. And so 17 and up is when the definitional change happens with the state of Texas. So our care homes in Dallas, they're fantastic. They do an awesome job. We have some really beautiful buildings and some amazing locations. We have some buildings that are not quite as pretty because they've been an operating care home for 10 years. And so they sort of serve a slightly different demographic than, say, some of our super premium homes, which have been fully remodeled. And, I think probably the common tie that binds is they're all in really nice areas of Dallas. So we have one house that's, a couple blocks from White Rock Lake. We've got 3 houses that are in the same zip code that, President Bush calls home. So, there's a lot of nice opportunities there in terms of the location, because a lot of times what people want is they want a 10, 15 minute, easy process to get in to visit their loved one. And so, when you're in the nicer areas, then obviously your clients that can afford services are much more likely to be close by. Or we even have a tour, depending on when this is being aired, we have a tour of a person who's literally able to walk to a care home, and she won't consider any of our other care homes because she's inside the neighborhood of one of our care homes. So very, very much a location focused type of business. They're all 8-bed facilities, so you'll never really have to be around more than 7 other people. And from a ratio perspective, we have a 1-to-4 ratio during the day and a 1-to-8 ratio at night, which allows us to sort of handle residents with higher needs, higher acuity, slightly more complex medical stuff we can handle because we have enough staff to oversee that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the families that we work with who choose the residential care homes, they like that staffing ratio because their loved one is going to get, more one-on-one care. They like the feel that it is a home environment. It's not, it doesn't feel like it's an institution, if you will, but they like that really warm, caring feeling like they're at home, especially if they have dementia. A lot of times I find it's less confusing, especially if they've been home the entire time and now they've just transitioned into senior living. So it does make for an easier transition. We saw this through COVID in the past year that we had a lot of families choose to move away from the larger places and move to the care homes. And a lot of that was obviously there weren't as many people, so they felt safer for sure, for not getting COVID. And then also it seemed it was a little easier to cut through and do some, I guess, visiting, if you will. Maybe if it was just a window visit or whatever, it's a lot easier in a house than if you're in a big building to do some sort of visiting with your family member. Tell us about how COVID affected y'all and what you've seen since this happened.
Yeah, so I guess I can answer the question in a couple of ways. So the first is, I think you're right, and keep in mind there actually was there's a couple of mathematical reasons to explain the anecdotal evidence that care homes did better in COVID. There's actually a couple of math reasons. So first off, let's say you have like us 5 care homes, 8 beds, right? Well, compared to, say, a 40-bed facility, same number of residents, same number of beds, we have 5 front doors, they have 1 front door. And the whole key to COVID is to not let it in the front door in a place when it has a chance to spread. And so obviously you have a reduction in harm in the sense that you have less visitors, because you can expose 40 residents to 40 visitors, or you can expose 8 residents to 1/5 the number of visitors, and so it just is a much smaller opportunity for it to come to the front door and increases infection control. Additionally, of course, if you were to have an outbreak, you can confine it in theory to one house versus the whole building. But the other thing is during some of the visitation rules that Texas put into place, one of the standards was if you had an active COVID case, then visitation was shut down. And so the math is simple. If you have 8 residents versus 80 residents, it's a much higher probability that you would have an active COVID case than 80 versus 8. And so there were facilities that, even though the visitation was open, they never in effect were allowed to have visitation because they always had an active case, or they always had a staff member that was active, or whatever the case may be. And so there was some math behind that actually made visitation better. We had some people that moved out of big buildings that were allowing visitation, but could never actually get to a 0 case environment to actually let visitation occur per state rules. As far as how it affected us, I mean, we were very fortunate, being on the development side, we sort of pay attention to supply chains. And so we sort of saw there was some things kind of rumbling in China when it was kind of, nobody was really talking about it in late January, and we started taking action late January, early February. And so we were able to secure PPE a little earlier and do some of that type of stuff. But it was very hard on our team. I mean, we had no cases of COVID in our Dallas operation. We're one of the few companies that can say that. We were at 100% occupancy going in. But the experience that we had was we realized in some ways that the visitation ban, which I think was in effect for 130 or 140 days by the state of Texas, that in some ways was worse than the virus, because we had a lot of seniors. We had a very high rate of death amongst our dementia population because they felt isolated and lonely. And they couldn't understand or couldn't process necessarily there was a pandemic. They just felt abandoned by their family. And there was only so much you could do with, FaceTime and window visits to sort of bridge that gap. So, I think what we learned is visitation is really important. And, creating an environment that's protective of COVID is certainly going to be important. And look, it's been true for a long time. Dallas has had norovirus outbreaks. We've seen situations where, nursing homes have had to shut down during flu season. So good infection control it certainly is important, whether or not you're in a pandemic, whether or not you're dealing with COVID. It can be important in other situations as well. So, I think the infection control piece of our model is just a huge advantage. If you're flipping a coin, like I can't decide between a big building and a small building, the exponential greater risk of infection and the exponential greater risk of death from infection would seem to, make that coin flip an easier decision in my opinion.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. The other thing, I want to kind of switch to your other model that you're building one in Denton outside Dallas, and it's going to be more like a campus type situation, several homes, and you've done the same in Louisiana. So tell us about this new model that you're building.
Yeah. So, I've always had an interest in design. And so I wanted to build a ground up facility. I wanted to build a purpose built facility because, when you're renovating houses, we can do a great job, but ultimately you're going to have some limitations based on that. So the number one thing we wanted to do is we wanted to design a building that had really smart, well thought out sight lines. So I think our campus, there are other campuses out there. There are other companies that have done campuses before. I identified a few ways I thought that those models could be improved. So the first thing is, when you pull up to the campus, there's a central sales and admin office. The reason why that matters is because I think the most important part of the tour isn't the building. It's the conversation you have with the family or with the resident about their needs, what they're going through. And so a good tour, in my opinion, if it lasts an hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes, is sitting down belly to belly, getting to understand, what their needs are. Because in my opinion, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, right? So many people are trying to offer themselves a solution. How can they when they don't know the resident's needs, the family's needs, things like that? So the central sales and admin office is amazing because you can sit down, have a nice conversation before you ever step foot in a facility. And so that makes a huge difference. The second thing that we did is our houses, you have to kind of picture an H shape. And in the center, the H is very fat. And then there are quadrants of bedrooms. So each house is a 16-bed facility with four bedroom quadrants. What that does is effectively means that our longest hallway is only about 50 feet. And so if you're in the common area, all you have to do is go to one hallway, you turn left or right, and then your bedroom, if it's the farthest bedroom, is only about 50 feet away. And so that helps a lot with people that have mobility impairment. It helps draw them out of their room because now it's not such a, you see oftentimes in big buildings, 100, 150 yard hallways. They got to go down to an elevator and then come around and go to dining. And that can be a pretty daunting task in some cases. For those that are cognitively impaired, it can be confusing, right? And so that's why you have these memory boxes, is to try to cue residents like, hey, this is where you live, because they all kind of look the same when you're out in the hallway. So we solve a lot of that stuff. The kitchen's open. The common area is a big open room. The nurse's station is got windows. And so you can literally be in the nurse's station charting, or you're doing medication, and you can see about 75, 80% of the common area, which means that you can kind of prevent falls and keep an eye on people, even when you're doing the necessary paperwork or the necessary charting that's required. The other big element that we do is our houses. It's built like a neighborhood. So the houses back up to each other. We've seen some other communities that build the parking in the center and they all kind of face the parking. The problem is when you're standing there, it feels like a medical office. It doesn't feel like a neighborhood. And so, you can literally leave our campus and then go walk through the park. And it feels like, when you pull up to it, it really looks indistinguishable from a regular neighborhood, save for the fact that the houses are, 9,000 square feet instead of, 3,000 square feet. And so that's kind of the model that we're building. We love that because, number one, we have the opportunity to deliver the outcomes that we insist upon. We still have the ratios. We still have the better outcomes, the reduced falls, the better meal service. But now we can have scaling. We can have an activities coordinator. We can have, transportation. We can have, all the things that you really love to have in any care home operation. And so that's a big part of it for us, is we wanted to essentially use Dallas was kind of our laboratory. We wanted to go in and really learn the business. And in my opinion, a lot of the people that have built campuses before, I don't think they came from the care home world. I think they came from the big building world. And so when I walk around those campuses, what I see is a big building shrunken down, right? And it feels like a shrunken down big building. That's not the thing we're after, right? The cheapest thing you could build from a building perspective is a rectangle, and then you have a door on every side. And it's door. But when you're in that, it doesn't feel like a home. And so we really, really wanted to purposefully design a product that not only had great sight lines and that, the caregivers could be effective in and the residents would have a great experience, but that still feels like a home. And so that was a big part of what we were trying to do in Denton. And I really think that, this campus model will catch fire. And, we're really excited to continue to build these out all over North Texas because it's such a need. And while sometimes people think I'm anti-big building, I'm actually not. I think big building has too much market share. There's a place for the big buildings of the world. I just think that residents and families really should and demand additional choices because one thing we don't talk about much is introverts. There are people that just don't want to be around 100 other people. And, a manageable number of people where it feels like maybe it's Thanksgiving every day, there's 20 people in the house or 15 people in the house. That's a lot more manageable for some people than having a meal with 80 or 100 people. And so it really is a model that's very needed. And, we're really excited to bring it to North Texas.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to open as well. And I agree. I mean, you need options. And I think it's important because some people do great in a big community and some need something smaller. So it's great to have those options out there. In those homes, will some be like assisted living only and others memory care only, or are they combined? How is that set up?
It's a great question. And actually it could even go further than that. So our initial campus will be 6 homes and there'll be a combination of assisted living, luxury assisted living, and memory care. What the luxury assisted living and the memory care have in common is they will have a private chef. And so when you drive up on our campus, a traditional model to be one chef cooking for 80, we'll have, 5 chefs cooking for 16 each. And so the base AL will have caregiver preparing meals like you'd have in a more traditional care home. It'll be a little bit more affordable. So we'll have a little bit more affordable price point to come into for families that, maybe a little bit more budget conscious and less concerned about some of the amenities. And then the luxury assisted living just has a little bit nicer finish out. And then it has that private chef being that, obviously having those chef meals is an awesome benefit. And then we also see the chef also from a care perspective, because obviously if caregivers are not focused on food at any really point throughout the day, then that's extra resources that can go into ADL care, extra resources that can go into, psychosocial stimulation with visits and things like that. So that's kind of the basic model. And then of course we have a memory care, which has a secured access control. The fences are in place and memory care with access control. So the AL campus can flow. You can sort of move around the assisted living campus, unfettered if you're a resident. And if you're in memory care, you have access to dedicated outdoor space. So that you can still enjoy the outside, but then also we don't have the risk of elopement, things like that. The thing that's really cool about Denton is we have, 4 other pad sites available to build additional homes. And so in terms of different subdividing groups, we could do any kind of niche that the market would support. So for example, if you're like, hey, I've got a rabbi, he wants a kosher home. Can you take care of his flock? We can do that. We can bring in a Hebrew newspaper. We can do a house that focuses on Parkinson's, for example, and the caregivers have specialized training. We can do a house that focuses on diabetic meals, right? So we can do really any niche you can think of. Even so much as we could do, sports fans. You could have a house that's all UT Longhorn fans and maybe they have dementia and we play the championship game every day. And so they're just happy every day because they're like, hey, we won the championship. And it's just over and over and over again. So there's all kinds of really cool stuff you can do when you have the ability to really go after a niche. And so we could stay more mainstream and just do assisted living or memory care, or we could have a house that has people with traumatic brain injuries and they're 30 years old and there's nowhere for them to go. So we have a lot of unique niche opportunities. And so the additional phasing of Denton will mean that the market will really tell us, hey, this is something that's missing. And then we can look to try to fill that void, because we all know that there's all kinds of, we have people with Parkinson's that maybe shouldn't be in memory care, but really can't be in assisted living. So there's a lot of examples where people are always kind of misplaced or they're not quite in the right setting. And so hopefully if we can find then 15 friends, then we can create a setting that's specifically tailored to individuals' needs.
That's great. I love that. So that's definitely a need that I've not seen anyone address yet. So I like the whole idea of doing like a niche kind of community like that. I had read on LinkedIn, I think it was an article you had written, and you'd mentioned also about technology in senior living and that's finally starting to kind of catch on. So talk to us a little bit about the technology in senior living and what you see that we're finally starting to see, but what the future is going to bring for technology.
Yeah. So my friend, Dr. Bill Thomas, he was featured in, Being Mortal by Dr. Gawande. He was the founder of the Greenhouse Project, which is basically small boutique nursing homes. Was really kind of the godfather of sort of bringing back small. If you really think about it, small was what used to happen, right? It used to be, you'd become widowed and then you take a bunch of people in and you run a boarding and care home, right? That was how we used to take care of people for a long time. Assisted living actually only started in like 81 or 82, 1981, 1982 in Oregon. So it's not a very old business. So the smaller stuff is actually what the past was. So we're actually, getting back to what's more normalized and sort of that. I think everyone thinks the big buildings are the normal thing, but they're actually quite the opposite. They're more of a new technology or a new concept. So as far as technology goes, Dr. Thomas and I both have said that we thought that technology really hasn't fulfilled any of its promises. And I think there's a couple of reasons. So you have sort of caregivers who are not necessarily tech savvy, and then you have residents who often are not tech savvy. The exception is that when the technology is stuff they use in their everyday life, they seem to adopt it and use it much better. So just like we saw during COVID, like FaceTime being a very effective tool, it's because people would use FaceTime prior to COVID. The people that try to bring in the specialized pedestals and different things, a lot of that stuff didn't work very well. So I think the one thing that we're very bullish on from a technology perspective is telehealth, I think is going to have a major impact. You saw a lot of doctors move to, hey, I'm not going to do in-person visits. So that way I'm not a vector of the virus for long-term care facilities. And so telehealth was very effective. But the other thing is that we're doing in our communities, we kind of, no one really talks about the infrastructure. So we actually are our own internet service provider. So most people sign a deal with, AT&T or Time Warner or Spectrum or whoever, and they pay them for service. We actually built out our own fiber infrastructure. So we actually are the internet service provider. What that means is we can actually allocate bandwidth to various rooms. And what that means is that what we're seeing now is a lot of the older buildings don't have the technology infrastructure to support multiple streaming devices, because almost all residents are going to have a Netflix account, or they're going to have a smart TV, or they're going to have Bluetooth, or they're going to have something. And so you see a lot of these other facilities where they struggle. No matter how good their Wi-Fi is, the cable coming in isn't big enough to support that much bandwidth use. And so we've actually got it set up now where I want to say it's between 20 and 25 megs per room in bandwidth, which allows them to do the streaming and allows them to do those things. So our houses are really well future-proofed. So while we haven't necessarily fallen in love with a particular technology, if you think about being early in technology, if you stay in certain hotel rooms that have the iPod docking station, you can just sort of tell like that hotel was built in like 06 to 07 or something, because they thought we were going to be using iPods for this period of time. And of course, the iPod, basically became integrated into the iPhone, and, who has an iPod anymore? So you really, from a technology perspective, from a development point of view, from an operations point of view, we just want to be future-proofed. So we have Cat 6 running in all of our rooms. And then we have that dedicated internet service provider bandwidth that allows us to basically adapt to the thing. So a lot of our technology deals with bandwidth, and a lot of our technology deals with basically being open that technology will bring in change, but that in the past, it's kind of failed to deliver much. There really hasn't been a lot of sweeping technology that's taken over senior housing. There's been a lot of effort, but adoption rates have been slow. I was on a call one time with a salesperson. We did this hour-long pitch about, I don't even remember what the technology was, but I just said at the end, I said, give me a list of 5 companies that are using it effectively so that I can talk to. You never followed back up. And I think the reason is because they don't understand, a lot of people that bring in technology don't really understand our environment. They don't really understand how dynamic it can be. They don't understand that, a little thing that, a wearable is great if the resident doesn't take it off, just like, how many times we found hearing aids in the trash can, or hearing aids in the toilet, or, in a pocket. I mean, things get lost, things get damaged, and weird things happen. So anybody that's ever had to deal with TV service in an assisted living or memory care, like a lot of times, like the TV's broken and you just got to go in and change the input, or they push some weird button. And so TV technology has been around for a long time. And sometimes we struggle with that in our environment. So you can only imagine when you get a little bit more complicated, or some little device you got to keep up with. So really, we're just kind of prepared we know that there'll be technologies coming in, but it's a little premature, I think, to determine exactly what those technologies will look like. So we just want to make ourselves available to accept those technological changes. And so our buildings are kind of designed with the future in mind.
Great. I think that's really smart to do that. And I think we're going to see more and more, especially after COVID and with people, being so isolated. I definitely feel that we're going to see a lot more with technology. The last question I always like to conclude with is to ask if there's an inspirational senior in your life that you could tell us about.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to choose from. I had a lot of really great grandparents, so I hate to single out any one of them, but one of my grandmothers, I called her Dandy, was a really amazing woman. I mean, she was entrepreneurial. She was a nurse during World War II, and she ran a clothing store. And she was one of the most loyal, tough women that you could ever imagine. My other grandmother was too. I had some very salt of the earth, just like unbreakable grandmothers in my life. And obviously, I think about them a lot because I learned a lot of lessons and values from their behavior and kind of how they handled things. And so I definitely give a hat to all of my grandparents, but certainly my grandmother as well.
Well, wonderful. And I'm sure you got the entrepreneurial spirit from her.
It was delayed. It just took me 35 years to have the guts to do anything, right?
Hey, that's good. You jumped in and did it. So it doesn't matter what age you are. Hey, I was in my 50s before I did this. Awesome. It's just good to do it. Well, thank you so much for being on. And how can people reach you? What is your website?
Yeah, so probably the easiest thing to do if they're interested in Denton, the website is The Sage Oak Denton. So TheSageoak Denton, DENTON.com. And then our Dallas operations, thesageoak.com. And then they can just email me at loe@thesageoak.com if they're interested in, employment opportunities, if they're interested in, maybe looking for care for a loved one. And we also do have investment opportunities for folks that are interested in this business, but don't want to run a facility, don't want to deal with the things that go with that. So we're available to people on multiple levels, I should say.
Excellent. And we, through my business, which is Loe Williams Senior Services, we work with Loe and with his communities and send families there. And we hear excellent feedback. So we will also have information on our website, and you can reach us through LoriWilliams-seniorservices.com. And thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.